Good morning, everyone online. Thanks for joining us today for this ACER webinar on the network code on demand response, a deliverable that we've been working on for quite a while, and we hope to give you some insights in today. We have quite an welcome all. My name is Mathieu Franse. I lead the market code team within ACER, responsible for this work. Joined here by Tina and the team who have done a lot of work on that. We have an interesting agenda today, going through the network code, but also hearing stakeholders' first responses to it and how they feel on what ACER has recently delivered. So a bit of history. This is indeed a process that has been going on for quite a while. You see the process on the screen that ACER has been going through together with the Commission and the TSOs and DSOs that have drafted provided us the draft network code. Actually, the process is even much longer than you can see on this slide, because I think a lot of these discussions already originate in the clean energy package that was adopted in 2019. So actually, we're quite on a long track of getting these new rules in. I think we've taken a significant step in getting this legislation drafted, and today we'll introduce to you the content of it, and indeed, as said here, stakeholders' first response to it, and indeed close off with what will happen next. So over the process of this network code drafting, we had a lot of stakeholder involvement. We held a public consultation. We had a lot of bilateral discussions with TSOs and DSOs. We had meetings with the drafting committee where we consulted them on the more tricky issues, and of course it all fed into a process that we ran as ACER with NRAs, having also a favorable opinion on the recommendation that was drafted. We've indeed tried to collect all these inputs. That's always been a huge effort, because you need a lot of inputs, as indeed also the statistics show. And indeed, we hope to tell you today what the outcome of that process is, but indeed also we'll see what others think of it. So what is it about? I think the core of this network code is about how to enable demand response participation in electricity markets. And what is a demand response participation? Indeed, how, I think currently largely inelastic electricity demand can indeed be more responsive to price signals, maybe increase when prices are low or decrease when prices are high. And making sure that indeed markets work more efficiently and need to provide the electricity at lower cost to consumers. For this to happen, indeed, we need market rules to ensure level playing field. So those new actors providing these services and demand response versus supply and production indeed is also treated in the same way, indeed where possible. It is also about TSO and DSO coordination. So between within and between markets that TSOs and DSOs run to operate the system for congestion management and for balancing services. Indeed, as the last part, lift barriers for demand response to provide those system services. So provide those services to the TSOs and DSOs for them to operate the system. What's the legal basis? So the legal basis is very wide, very I would say comprehensive, but also sometimes a bit complex, because there's a lot of parts that are in the European legislation that relate to this network code, and indeed that we've taken as a basis to draft the current recommendation. We also focus on that these new rules should cover the cross-border aspect of it. So where is Europe indeed of added value? Where can we provide a framework that indeed makes sure that these markets function in the same way across borders? Also because market participants are in different countries and provide the same services in different countries, and it would lead to more efficiency if they can do that in the same way. So which markets does it cover? On the left, you see a bit a picture that we've shown before, because there's a lot of different aspects about the whole demand response topic, and also a lot of things that we've done in conjunctions to spur this process. This has led to revisions of EU grid network connection codes, where we provided the possibilities for indeed new players to be connected to the grid, how EV is connected, and how this indeed can be efficiently done. There, of course, was also a new task in electricity market design to assess flexibility needs at the national level. We've done an ACER report on the barriers to demand response a few years ago. At the end, we'll also give you a sneak preview to an upcoming report we have coming on that. And of course, then the topic of today, the new rules on demand response. If we look at which markets they cover, it is primarily, and this is the part you see on the right, it is the wholesale market. It is where market participants professionally engaged in electricity trading, on forward markets, day-ahead markets, intraday markets, and how they interact between indeed the traditional suppliers, market participants, but indeed also those new upcoming market participants as aggregators, providing those new services with all those new actors in the market. But indeed also the TSO DSO side. So the services TSOs and DSOs need to operate the system, and need how those traditional suppliers are able to provide this. But they need also the relations between them. We stay a bit away from the retail market and all the details there, also because we consider that to be mainly part of the national framework, but indeed the focus for these European rules are on the wholesale market. So I come to the agenda. So today we'll go through different parts of the guideline. Athena will mainly guide you through it. She's been very instrumental and very hard working on this whole topic for the last years, and indeed will introduce every part that the recommendation consists of, and we'll have different responses from ENSUI and EUDSO entity, from Eurelectric, and indeed after the first Q&A session, we'll have responses on data exchange by Laurent Schmid, and on market interaction by Guro Gotterud from Smartden, and we'll close off with a Q&A again on those latter topics. The webinar will be closed with looking at the future and the next steps, and the Commission will tell us what their intention is on how this file will be taken forward. And then we close off with some final remarks. Then some housekeeping rules. So as said, we have some Q&A sessions in the webinar. For this, we use Slido. I think you can click the link here. We'll also have QR codes coming in along the way where you can look. But indeed, please have a look. I think the code on Slido is DR_NC, so you'll be able to find it like that. But please put your questions in there. They will be moderated, and we'll get through them in the Q&A sessions. Of course, the slides and the recording of the webinar, or it will be recorded indeed, and it will be published and uploaded on our websites. And indeed, when you go into the Q&A, please like the questions so they go up in the scoring, and we'll more likely be able to answer them first. But if we have enough time, we'll of course go through all of them. So indeed, the market participant stakeholders will respond to the point, but indeed also the Q&A session can be, you can ask any questions you might need. One final thing indeed, so during the webinar, next to the Q&A, also in the Slido app, you will see polls. There will be 5 questions, I think, in total, and in each session we'll have a different question. So we kindly invite you to also have a look at that and give your answer and input, and also results will be published on our website afterwards. I think that was it. I think I would go then give the floor to Athena and give her the first word for introducing indeed how the pieces are brought together. Athena, please go.
Thanks a lot, Matthew. Hello, everyone. So indeed, I will start by presenting an overview of the package, meaning the network code, but also the topics that we cover and how they are connected, and also talking a bit about the methodologies that are developed pursuant to this network code, and then give the floor to Torsten and Fabio for listening the reaction from EUDSO entity and EUDSO respectively. As Matthew already mentioned, this network code and in general this package covers the aspects of wholesale markets, so markets that are already there and regulated at European level, like day ahead and intraday, but also the participation of demand response in the provision of services, market-based procurement of services, balancing, which is again covered in the balancing regulation, but also new processes like the market-based procurement of what we call local services in this network code, referring to congestion management and voltage control. There are aspects of demand response that are relevant for all wholesale markets, and these are covered in the beginning of the network code. So topics such as the measurements, including the dedicated measurement devices and baselines, are relevant for all the participation of demand response in all markets. And then this is covered in, these both aspects are covered in Title 2 of the network code. And then we have the big topic of aggregation models, as we consider that the big integration of demand response in the markets will be through aggregation models, through the implementation of aggregation models. This is covered mainly in the balancing regulation under the section on imbalance settlement. These are the aspects that are relevant for all markets, but then we have also some more specific requirements for the provision of the service. As you know, when market participants want to provide a service to a system operator, they need to go through a process in order to prove to the system operator that they are able to provide this service. So in this case, and for all, again, this is for all market-based procurement of services. We have in Title 3 the process and the requirements on service provider qualification, covering both product verification and product pre-qualification. The aim is to make those processes faster, to streamline them, to ensure that they are not the service provider do not have to go through the same process for multiple system operators. And as a tool in this, in order to achieve this objective, we have also the requirements on the flexibility information system, which we further specify, especially the processes related to that. So these are relevant, as mentioned, for all services, but then, for example, for balancing, for the market-based procurement of balancing services, we already have the balancing regulation. For the other services, for the local ones, we don't have any European regulation covering them. So in the remaining, almost all the remaining titles of the network code, plus in some system operation articles, we try to cover requirements related to that. And this is mainly done in 3 different steps. One, we try to cover more long-term processes like the services needs assessment and the distribution network development plans. But just to mention that we don't go into the details of that. The level of the requirements is mainly kept at ensuring transparency and the provision of sufficient information to market participants in order to make sure that the market-based processes are developed efficiently. Then we have the medium term, where we cover Title 4, the decision of having non-market-based procurement as a deviation from the default market-based, and requirements on the flexible connection agreements. Again, in both those topics, we don't go into detail. We try to have processes and requirements that ensure that the market-based procurement is the default, so that sufficient justification is given if there is a deviation, and also some general requirements in order to ensure that flexible connection agreements do not distort the existing markets. And finally, we go to the short term, where we see more the aspects of the system operators coordination in Title 7, where it is important to have the cooperation between the system operators in identifying either physical congestion or voltage issues, and ensuring that there is sufficient coordination when solving this issue. So when activating resources in order to ensure that there is no that the solution for one part of the grid does not cause a problem in the other parts. And finally, the market-based procurement of services, of these local services, which is also the most expensive one in Title 4, as it tries to cover all the aspects related to requirements for procuring system operators or pricing and settlement of these services. The network code includes all these requirements, but it is important to keep in mind that although since the framework guideline discussion, we had to maintain a fine balance regarding what needs to be included in a European framework and what needs to be left at national, as Matthew already mentioned. And on top of that, even when we agree that something should be addressed at European level, we need to keep in mind that this network code will be like that for the next 10 years, as the amendment process is difficult. So we need to make sure that we don't restrict ourselves by what we put in this network code for future developments. So we had to make a distinction between areas where the target is clear and known, and we expect it to be stable for the next years, and then we include it directly in the network code, but also areas where more innovation is required and topics will be further clarified in the future, or they have more dynamic nature, so we need to have some tool in order to address them also in the future. And in this sense, we have this threefold, let's say, feed into the national terms and conditions. So for the national rules, one aspect is what comes already from the implementation of the electricity directive. So aspects that do remain at national level. Secondly, then the requirements that are already clear in the network code, and in this sense, there are requirements that need to be included in the national terms and conditions, but there is also this concept of European methodologies, which aims to include these topics where further developments are needed, and they will be further specified in the future. So these are the aspects, and as we understand, there is a balance between how the European and the national implementation, the European harmonization interact in this context. So we have the national implementation. The idea was that we start with the national implementation, then we monitor that, we identify best practices, and we move into European harmonization. However, during our consultation with the stakeholders, there were some strong concerns that this, so starting with the national implementation could lead to implementation delays at national level, or to having wrong direction at the national implementation. So what we have done at the end is to change a bit the order of these of the two, at least for the topics where we already know that there is broad implementation of the directive, so we can have some useful conclusions for harmonization at European level. So if we follow the whole series, everything starts with implementation monitoring. We aim at ACER side to already start with implementation monitoring this year in order to identify what has been implemented from the electricity directive provisions. The implementation by EUDSO and EUDSO, which is foreseen in the in the network code will come later, so once the network code is adopted. But then the ACER implementation monitoring will aim at identifying the needs for harmonization, identify best practices. Then there will be the whole discussion with the demand response European stakeholders group, which will be developed and set up in the next months. Then a proposal by EUDSO entity and ENTSO-E once the network code is adopted, the ACER approval, and then this whole will feed into the national process, which will again be monitored in the future for further harmonization. So this is the concept and then interaction between the two. And now I will give the floor to Torsten for EUDSO entities reaction.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute. And of course, the DSO entity values it very much. And it's also a sign how much you value different stakeholders. We'll have different stakeholders in this webinar, and I think it's a good spirit of cooperation. If we have a look at the next, exactly, thank you. I'd like to briefly give you a few thoughts on the governance that's included in there. We, of course, more than delighted that this is a network code that recognizes the role of DSOs. Most of the available demand response and all kinds of distributed flexibility is obviously connected to the DSO grids. And we now basically have a network code where both TSOs and DSOs are working together to promote the topics. And we think this is a really valuable step forward, and we are committed to make that a success. There are a number of roles assigned. That is also mostly good ideas. However, the network code, and that's why we have one question mark on the governance, the network code has these roles and responsibilities and also enables them for the member states to assign them in a different way. That might not bring the necessary harmonization we need in order to, for example, to make the same models everywhere, to make the same processes everywhere, and to enable market participants to go forward. So maybe we still have to work on that one a bit. However, very positive are the two on the right-hand side. We think that what is in Article 4 now, the process to jointly, and then we come back to TSOs and DSOs doing it together, the process to develop proposals on both European level, the TCMs, and on national level, the all-important TNCs, together with all relevant system operators, is now has a very good structure. It takes everybody on board who really contributes to the topic. It takes account of those member states where there are many DSOs, and finds good ways to organize that and to go forward there. So I think we'll all find in all member states ways to implement this. And as I said before, this webinar is a good sign of how much stakeholders are valued more and more. And I think it's also a result of the process we've been through, that we see that we do have certain assignments, but nobody is going forward on their own anymore, but it's always in dialogue, in a constructive dialogue, in deep dialogue with stakeholders. So also that is a very good result of the process. Next chart, yes. We have to balance things in the way forward. We have to balance things between seeing that we do not make timelines too challenging and that we have something that's realistic, where we can implement things with a necessary diligence that we look at them. But on the other hand, of course, we are already very late to mobilize the potential of distributed flexibility. And if you look at the decarbonization objectives, we should move faster. So you'll see a few of the times that we have to address on the right-hand side. And we also think it's a good way to say, before we've implemented everything, we again, after 36 months, take a look at further harmonization. So you try to balance these two, try to balance that we have to work in a proper way, but that we also have to recognize how challenging the environment is by saying we link the two. Even before we completed everything, we make further proposals for harmonization. So we run things more or less in parallel. And I think that's also part of what Tina has just presented. And we are convinced that this is a very good attempt to balance these two effects. Third and last chart. Thanks. I was laughing again. I didn't make this chart. Whoever made this chart was not aware that you also had a balance with the stones, but it shows you, if we have the same picture, that we basically have the same ideas. And yes, it's a balancing act between implementation on a national level. The network code leaves a lot of room for implementation and for different specific solutions on a member state level, and it is depends always on the topics. It can be very good because it's the appropriate reply. You have to look at it topic by topic, but it can, in some cases, whatever, take the harmonization of data formats, it can also be a lost opportunity. So again, this is also a balancing act where we would say, yes, mostly it has had very good results. We welcome many of the decisions that have been made for harmonization or for more detailing on a member state level, but we also have a question mark here and there. But I know it's a difficult task, and we'll see what the further process brings. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Thorsten, and thank you also, Aitina, for the kind invitation to present here, but especially for the constructive exchanges over the last years. My name is Fabio Genoese, representing ENTSO-E here. I had the pleasure, together with Thorsten, to co-chair the development team that brought up the first draft or proposal of the NCDR. And so I can say, I think, with some confidence that the NCDR is a very special piece of new EU regulation. I think last year in Florence, I said it's probably one of the biggest collaborative drafting exercises in the history of EU regulation. First, the DSO entity and we made a proposal intensively discussed with and reviewed by the drafting committee where the other stakeholders are present. Then ACER, you took over, again involving stakeholders along the way through the dedicated session, the public consultation. Now we are on the last mile, the comitology process before entry into force. From experience, I think we can all say that what matters with EU regulation is not just the drafting, but probably even more is the implementation. This is what changes things. So as ENTSO-E, I think we welcome the proposed implementation process of the NCDR. It foresees that system operators, meaning TSOs and DSOs together, will propose national terms and conditions on a series of topics, that they discuss them again intensively with national stakeholders. One of my favorite topics, I think, is the flexibility information system, which will provide a single and common front door for service providers. We think this is a huge step forward. It will avoid the fragmentation of IT platforms. It will avoid that service providers have to sign up to different platforms. So there will be a one-stop solution. We think this is huge. During this process, as I said, of drafting national TCs, it will be key to involve the stakeholders because these stakeholders are precisely those who devise and execute solutions in a practical setting. What do I mean by practical setting? I mean that these stakeholders know their customers, they know the market dynamics, they know the existing framework at national level in which they operate. So this is, I think, key to provide a practical solution and bring tangible benefits. We are really confident that the way this implementation process is designed, it will bring tangible benefits to market participants and hopefully an ever-increasing active participation of distributed resources in electricity markets. Because starting from a practical setting, which is the national level, will enable a swift and practical implementation. That being said, and this is my second point here, we also welcome the process of further EU harmonization as it is foreseen in network code demand response. It is based on evidence, it is based on reporting and monitoring of the NCDR implementation. So ACER, together with the DSO entity and ENTSO-E, may identify best practices, applied solutions, but probably also regulatory gaps, things that we had not thought of when drafting the code, and which is normal because technology changes. And this evidence will serve as a starting point for further EU harmonization. again, a good approach. As a last point here, pleased to highlight that ENTSO-E is already working on EU harmonization of the pre-qualification of standard balancing products. This was a key feedback from the yearly survey of market participants conducted in the context of the implementation frameworks of the EU balancing platforms. And it fits quite nicely, I think, with what I said just a few seconds ago on EU harmonization. It is a stepwise, it is an evidence-based EU harmonization process. In balancing, we started with first creating a standardized product, and now we can work on the surroundings. First thing is the pre-qualification, but as you will see later, there's also coming from this NCDR package an objective to standardize the data exchange between TSOs and BSPs at European level. And again, we think this is a huge and important step forward, and I'm really looking forward to the implementation. Moving on to the next slide, allow me just to spend a few minutes on the timeline. I know this is sometimes considered boring, but it will surely not be a walk in the park. Implementation timelines needs to be feasible, and implementation needs to be consistent. As you can see from the green boxes, there will be multiple TCs, terms and conditions, being prepared in parallel. TCs for baselining methods, TCs for local service providers, TCs for the flexibility information system, and the TCs for the coordination, both between TSOs and DSOs, but also between DSOs and DSOs. And we think, especially the two that are indicated by the arrow, so the TCs for the local services and for the coordination, they are heavily interlinked, and so they need to be aligned. This is because the coordinated procedures between the system operators, they of course depend on the way you design local markets, on the conditions that you define for the local service providers. So as ENTSO-E, I can say we share the objective of being as fast as possible, but we should not ignore that there is a need, of course, of being consistent in all these proposals. Again, will not be a walk in the park. The work that lies ahead is probably bigger than what we have done so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Maybe moving to one of our specific topics and the aggregation models. I will start with presenting what we have in the network code, and then I will give the floor to Rita Mota from Euroelectric to give their views. So on balance responsibility, we already know from the electricity regulation that all market participants are responsible for the imbalances they cause in the system, and in this sense they should either be balance responsible parties or they shall delegate their responsibility to another BRP. So this means that even market participants only active in day-ahead or intraday, they are balance responsible parties. Suppliers, again the same, and service providers in market-based procurement of services, they also need to ensure their balance responsibility. What does that mean? Balance responsibility essentially means that the position in the market needs to be reflected in the physical withdrawals and injections. So for every BRP, there is this calculation of the allocated volume with the withdrawals and injections and the final position based on market schedules, and the two should be equal. There is also a third element in that, which is the imbalance adjustment. In case a system operator activates a certain volume for covering system services or other needs. So at the end, the calculation of the imbalance consists of these three terms, which is the physical aspect, the market aspect, plus the system operator need in line with the requirements. So the market participants engaged in aggregation, as any other market participant, are also subject to this balance responsibility, which means that aggregators should also be BRPs or should delegate their balance responsibility to another BRP. So these three values are also calculated for market participants engaged in aggregation. And then we have the different aggregation models, which for now are identified as they have in several reports or based on the implementation of the specific models now. But we cannot be sure that these models will be like that also in the coming years or after 10 years. And this is why already in the framework guideline, we said that the description should not be of the aggregation models themselves, but rather of the types of the aggregation models, meaning that we need to find an exhaustive way of describing the aspects of them, but not in a way that would restrict on what we can implement or name a model in the future. So in this sense, in our approach, we describe the models on the basis of the imbalance settlement, as this is the only, let's say, steady part of this whole interaction. So for the imbalance settlement, now on top of these three terms that were included so far, we have identified two more as corrections to existing terms, depending on the implemented model. So a TSO may have a correction in the allocated volume in order to implement a specific model or a correction to the final position. Now, because the correction in the final position is actually a correction of the market schedule, this is understood to be also a trade between the two BRPs. I mean, even if not initiated by themselves, but implemented, exposed as a correction. But then we also understand that this correction in the final position should also be followed by a settlement for so a financial transfer, what we call a settlement for this volume correction. So in this sense, we have also the option of the member state to have a financial compensation on top of that. So independently of the model that is being implemented, the member state has also the possibility of applying a financial compensation. And in this way, we consider that we have covered all the cases. So if one BRP, if there is one BRP per metering point, there is no change in the imbalance settlement. Of course, this can correspond to different aggregation models. If there are multiple BRPs per metering point, then there are different options on how to implement that. It could be the final position correction with a financial transfer. It could be an allocated volume correction, and it could be also no correction at all. Each of these points does not necessarily correspond to one aggregation model, because we have left out completely the relationship between the aggregator and or between these multiple BRPs, as this can be part of the national rules on aggregation models. Regarding financial transfer and financial compensation, the two are differentiated. The financial transfer, as we already mentioned, is aimed to cover the transfer of energy, so the settlement that is related to this transfer of energy. It is linked to a position correction because it is reflected in the market schedule. It can be bidirectional, and the price determination is open in the sense that although we consider this to be a very important aspect in the implementation of this model, it is something that needs to be further investigated. So for now, there are no limitations in the balancing regulation, because all these are implemented as amendments to the balancing regulation on the price determination. Regarding the financial compensation, this includes the compensation for additional costs. So if you already have a financial transfer, then this financial compensation should not cover the same costs. And in this case, there is also the possibility, in line with the directive, to take into account net benefits in order to reduce this financial compensation. The aim of this separation is to distinguish between the compensation that is linked to the transfer of energy, and anything that comes additionally on top of that. And both of them are optional, also in the sense that the financial transfer is subject to the selection of the specific model. So it is up to the member state to select or not a model that has financial transfer and transfer of energy. I will give the floor now to Rita for Eurelectric's views.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So first of all, thank you, and thank you very much, Athena, for your very clear, always very pedagogical intervention as well. It's very good to have the capacity to make what is complex into a simple way of explaining things. So if we can move to the first slide. Okay, so first of all, and starting with a positive, as we saw in Athena's presentation before, there is this possibility to correct these volumes. So this is intended to neutralize any actions in imbalance settlement. And here we are not talking about billing to consumers, but about the balance responsibility, which refers to the settlement done by the TSOs on the deviation to the energy forecast or to the market positions. The downside here is that this is not always ensured because the non-corrected model is still possible, which means that the base principle of ensuring balanced responsibility is not always ensured. This means that incentives may not be fully aligned for agents to be responsible by the imbalances they cause, and that also increases costs for suppliers. And it's important to say that these costs, they don't just vanish, so they end up being reflected in prices, and they also distort the competitive dynamics. So this is one concern that we have regarding the aggregation models here as they are foreseen. Another point is that we've went from an initial request of listing exhaustively possible types of aggregation models to now to a set of criteria that can be combined differently. This also works and it's also positive, but we risk ending up with 27 different models, which then would create an unlevel playing field within EU, and it also makes it much more complex for multi-geography agents. So to avoid that, what we would recommend is additional guidance to member states with examples, exchange of best practices that could be beneficial to really have an effective implementation. As Fabio also mentioned, implementation is key here to have a better and more effective implementation, and also some degree of harmonization from start, even because, and also Athena mentioned this network code is intended to last for the next 10 years and revisions are difficult. So we should already try to converge to some degree of harmonization here. Last in this slide, and another positive, is the fact that the aggregation framework, it doesn't foresee only balancing, though it is foreseen in the balancing network code, but it truly intends to apply to all electricity markets, which is definitely a plus. So on the next slide, we will see these topics of financial transfer and compensation. And here it's important to bear in mind, and Athena explained this, these are two very different things. So the financial transfer is the counterpart of the energy transfer that occurs. For instance, if there is an activation to reduce energy, so there's an energy transfer here, even if the imbalance correction doesn't change, the fact that this doesn't change the fact that the supplier already bought it ahead in the day-ahead market, for instance. So the supplier won't be billing this energy, but it pays for it to the NEMO. So there should always be a correction for the imbalance, but the financial transfer is equally a direct effect and it is necessary. So if we have the non-corrected model, and we also have this non-correction in terms of this financial transfer, we end up again adding costs on this, and this will end up being reflected also on prices. So that's the big risk here. On the financial compensation, on the other hand, this refers to other costs. It's more indirect effects to the suppliers, and it is clear that this is an option to the member state to assess whether these are relevant or not to include. And here we are talking, for instance, about hedging positions. If a supplier hedged position because it has a contract with the consumer that is under a fixed price contract, and there's a significant reduction in volumes, Depending on price dynamics, there may be a cost. Other examples are the rebound effects. So a variation of load in one period usually correspond to an inverse variation in another, and that also causes imbalance in different periods. Here, it is positive that some examples, of course, are provided on what can be included. Lastly, deducting on the so-called net benefits from this compensation really makes no sense to deduct this from the supplier compensation, because if these are not a benefit that are directly a benefit from that supplier, these are overall benefits for the entire agents, for the entire consumers, and it makes no sense to offset the costs in which the supplier actually incurred. So these are benefits that we are talking about, such as reducing overall wholesale prices because we have a better optimized generation mix, for instance, or reduce network costs. And by the way, if we reduce the prices in wholesale market in a scenario of hedge position, this might even result in a higher cost for the supplier. So it's also important to keep this in mind. I would stop here and looking forward for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Athena, for these first introductions. I would indeed now go to the Q&A session. As you might have noticed, well, those providing the question, I've tried to put labels on them, so we go through them by topic. So we'll first have a number of general questions, and I would propose to start from the top. One of the questions that attracts the most attention, and I would put it to Athena. That's the question was, could you please clarify which topics do you mean for changing the order of national versus European, where you mentioned broadly implemented following the clean energy package? I think it's on slide 13, Athena, the question relates.
Yes, thanks. So the main two topics that we see that it would be beneficial to start with the European harmonization is the pre-qualification and the aggregation model. So pre-qualification is already broadly implemented in any case, starting also with balancing, but aggregation models is also another topic. By broadly implemented does not necessarily mean that it's being broadly implemented by all member states, but there are a few years now of experience from the broad implementation in some member states, and we can draw conclusions that could help us move with European harmonization.
Thanks. Then the next question was on the derogations. So looking at the demand response network code, the article on derogation has been removed. Does this mean derogations are no longer possible? For an evolving market, this seems quite worrying. Do you have? I think it's not really true, but yeah, go ahead, I think.
No, I mean the derogation article was there, but it was empty in the sense that we didn't have specific for the derogation. You need to have specific provisions for which you foresee the derogation. We, in the context of this network code, we do have the derogation, but this is only related to the provision in the balancing regulation. So there we have added in the respective article, but for the points that we include in the network code, we don't see any point or any requirement that would need the provision of derogation. So indeed, we haven't included that.
Thank you, Athena. Then the next question is on I think the definition of demand response, whether we regard power storage also as demand response, and if so, all storage or only behind the meter.
So this was a topic that we had discussed already since the scoping exercise, what to include and whether this network code is only about demand response. So in this case, I mean, we the demand response also covers, for example, distributed generation, storage, all that. But the important aspect is to have in mind that the rules that we have in the network code are not only applicable to demand response, and in this sense are applicable to all resources. So they follow the non-discrimination principle. It's just that the aim of these provisions is to enable demand response, but they are not only applicable to demand response. So in this sense, the power storage is regarded demand response in the sense that it is on the distribution level. But in any case, the provisions included in this network code are relevant for power storage the same way that they are relevant for all resources.
Thank you, Athena. The next question is a bit of a legal question. It's the question, are you afraid that the network code of demand response will be easily legally challenged as going outside of the delegation scope? That means inclusion of different types of generation than distributed generation, as what was stated in Article 59.
Yeah, so in this process, as Matthew showed at the very first slide, we every time build on the previous step. So there was the first step, which was the scoping exercise. Then there was the second step, which was the framework guideline. And after each of these steps, there is the confirmation of the Commission. So from our perspective, we have a network code that follows the framework guideline. The framework guideline that was part of the request that the Commission provided to EUDSO and the EUDSO entity. In this sense, I mean, we have assessed that part. From our perspective, we consider that it is legitimate to have it in. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks. I think I will do the last question, and we move to the aggregation model category, so to say. I think the last one is where we can give more information on the planned DRESC stakeholder group.
Yes, so the aim is to have a call on that in the coming months. We will have the terms of reference. We will open a call for having members, and then the plan is to launch that maybe right after summer, or that's more or less the planning. So to have a first meeting.
Thanks. So then I go to a group of aggregation model discussions. I noticed, Rita, that there's also a question for you coming, so it may be good that you have a look already, but maybe to start with the top scoring question first. And it's a question on slide 25, whether financial transfer is really optional and whether it is indeed between BRPs.
Okay,
Yeah,
so sorry, go ahead.
No, I think it's this one for Athena, Rita. I'll come with question 3 with you. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. I was trying to see if slide 25 was indeed mine or Rita's, but okay, good.
Okay, sorry,
yes, so indeed, it is optional in the sense that you may not implement the model that comes with the financial transfer, but if you choose to implement a model that includes final position correction, then financial transfer comes also with this. So it is a choice on whether you will implement the model or not. Now, whether it is between BRPs, this is how we have included it now in the balancing regulation. We had also some discussions that this could be also between market participants. So although we have covered it in the context of the imbalance settlement, which is for BRPs, we also see the possibility of having that between market participants.
Rita, did you want to say something on this, or is it okay?
No, it's just okay. It's okay.
Okay, thanks. Good. Then the next question, Athena, was the diagram showed you showed had an arrow between aggregator and supplier. I think it was the one I showed. Can you clarify its meaning, given that the directive says that no agreement should be required with any third market party or aggregator to operate?
Yes, so just to clarify that by aggregation models, we don't mean only the independent aggregation model. So it is in general aggregation model. So I agree that in the context of an independent aggregator, there should be no contract between the two, but in order to ensure this independence. But aggregation models is perceived as something broader than that, and this is why we have also this arrow to cover the aggregation models where there is a contract between the two parties.
Although financial transfer can still happen between those parties, although maybe going via the TSO. Good. I think that the question, I think the first, I think it's a question to your lecture, but please correct me if I'm wrong, but please comment. Since there are multiple types of markets for demand response, DSO services wholesale, with different interaction, it is important to have the possibility to establish different aggregation models. For instance, DSO flexibilities. For DSO flexibility, the volumes are very low. I know this is not really a question, but maybe I don't know who would like to respond to it.
So maybe I can comment on this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's true that there are different markets. They have different realities, and I think it's important to have this possibility of having different aggregation models. But the thing is that there are some principles that should be kept. And as a principle, as a default principle, the balance responsibilities should always be kept. This is enshrined in the internal electricity market regulation. So this should be kept. So this means that a volume correction should be by default in the different models. So this should always be considered. Now, it can be foreseen that even though this can be the default, there can be an assessment, for instance, to ensure whether there is materiality to actually implement these kind of things. And I understand that in markets where the volumes are so residual, sometimes it's more burdensome to impose and implement all IT developments and so on to properly ensure and correct very, very tiny variations. So it doesn't make sense for that. But I mean, the default base should always be to have this correction of volumes and to ensure that there is a financial transfer when there is an energy transfer, in fact. So this should be the basis for all the models, I would say. But I agree that there should be some degree of assessment on the materiality of the different markets. On that, I totally agree.
Thank you, Rita. I will go to the next question. The question is on slide 23, Athena, is why is rebalancing by the ESOs always required? And I asked rebalancing meaning counter activation indeed combined with a congestion management action. Basically, why the upward part by the ESOs would always be required. Also, in case of rebalancing by the ESOs, there will be a market impact, and it might be more efficient to let the rebalancing responsibility sit with the BRP. I think you can answer that, right?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure if it is linked to slide 23 in the sense that, in there we have this imbalance adjustment, which is not necessarily what is included here. I mean, in the question as this rebalancing. So imbalance adjustment is completely different, is when system operator needs a service and then they just activate. On the rebalancing, as is asked in the question, which is covered in other part of the network code, it's what we call ensuring system balance. We do have a requirement where we say that it is important that this counteraction is taken. But I agree that depending on the national rules, this could be left by the BRP, so the market participant. It depends on when this activation is done, and then indeed it can be left up to market participant to correct that if this is covered by the national rules. But if it is up to the system operator, then we see the benefit that this counteraction, even if not in isolated activation, so it doesn't have to follow each activation, but at least it should not be left for the very end for the balancing time frame. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Athena. I think I have one last question, and I propose to go to the next topic. I think then we're right on time. So the question is also the same slide. Services that are not balancing services don't need to be adjusted. If yes, how is the vision that ACER has for how this would work for individual consumers, e.g. industrial, providing flexibility services to DSOs? They do not generally act in any of the established markets.
Maybe just to say that the whole concept of the adjustment is exactly the fact that this balance between final position, which is market schedule, and actual injections and withdrawals should be corrected. So that's the point of the imbalance adjustment, if an action has been taken by the system operator. In this sense, indeed, this is not only limited to balancing, because if we have a market participant who has a certain market schedule, commits to certain injections and withdrawals, and then a system operator activates this market participant for provision of congestion management services, let's say, then this activation, which will destroy this market participant's balance, should be corrected. So in this sense, this adjustment takes place also for other services, but it is important to have in mind that we do that in order to make sure that the reflection of the market position is correct when it comes to physical injections and withdrawals. So this is where it makes sense to have it.
Good. Thank you, Athina. I will propose we go to the next slot. So I think the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Matthew. So I will present the data exchange standardization, the approach that we followed in the network code, and then we have Laurent Schmidt from Solar Power Europe for presenting their views. In the network code, one important starting point, let's say, is that the data exchange standards are now part of the product attribute. So when a product is defined, apart from all the technical specificities, which could be deactivation period, ramping rates, full activation time, stuff like that, we also have an additional element in this list being the data exchange standards. So to the extent that the same product is being used even by different system operators, it means that the same data exchange standards are required for the interactions between system operators and service providers. So this is the main starting point and the approach we have for the network code. But let's see what that means for the different products. For balancing products, we already have them standardized across Europe, and I refer here to the products that are used in the context of the European balancing platforms. So we have one standard product per balancing process, meaning one product for AFRR, for MFRR, and for RR. It is important also to mention here that for FCR, because there is also a question, we don't have a European standardized product in the sense that there is no requirement for a European platform for the exchange of balancing capacity, including FCR, but there are FCR cooperations, and in this context, we would understand that to the extent that standard products are being used, it makes sense also to standardize the data exchange related to that. For balancing, there is also limited use of specific products. So for these ones, there is no possibility of standardizing the data exchange in the sense that the products themselves are different. For products for local services, we don't have the same approach in the sense that it is local services, so there is no European platforms for exchanging them. What we have as a requirement in the network code is that the system operator should strive to use as much as possible existing products. So in this sense, if, for example, for congestion management, you use the same type of balancing product, then consequently, you would also have the same data exchange standards related to this product. What we have also as requirement in the network code is the requirement for standardization, but at national level. So for standardization of products being used for local services, but only at national level. So there's no European requirement there. So since these are the two different approaches for balancing and local products, we can see now what that means for the data exchange standardization. For balancing products, we have the requirement that by 12 months after the entry into force, ENTSO-E would publish a list of European standards based on European set of standards with one standard defined per relevant data exchange process for each of the standard balancing products. So for the AFRR, you would have one standard for the exchange, for example, for settlement or for the different processes. And then 2 years after the publication of this list, there is a requirement that this single standard should be implemented by TSOs and BSPs. So this is a very clear process for achieving this standardization at the European level. For local services, we have a requirement that a single standard should be used at national level for data exchanges related to settlement. But for the rest, there's no clear requirement with respect to that. What we do have at European level is the requirement for harmonization through the respective methodology, European methodology, on the market-based procurement of local services, meaning on congestion management. So the European standardization can only be expected if we have standardized products for that. And this is the tricky part with the local services. And I give now the floor to Laurent for reactions.
Yes, thank you, Atina. And again, congratulations for this gigantic work which has been done both by ACER and as well as ENTSO-E and the DSO entity. So it's good to see that things are coming together and getting much clearer as what we see into this presentation. So I'm representing here Solar Power Europe and just want to come back on certain principles which we discussed through the drafting of the code. If you go to the next slide. I think the principle we're really about how can we reduce the barrier of mass-produced devices. And so here is trying to define not only a standard, but also a set of data exchange and information to be exchanged for this device. And for that, it was particularly important to also consider FCR. So if you have a battery behind a meter, if you've got a V2X charger or whatever, all these I think are produced in mass, and they are as much as possible on our European scale design. And from that point of view, it's very, very important to harmonize this interface. So we very welcome, I think, the approach which has been made and taken on the balancing side around standardized product, around reference of 18 cents and European standards. A lot of them are actually already existing. We don't really understand why we need actually 12 months for establishing this list. I think this list is largely already in place. It's very important to consider this data exchange to be all electronic, I think, and go as much as possible into enabling real-time interactions down to activation. I think there are still few requirements where we see operational control and activation to move away from standards. Again, these are obstacles to these devices. That means these devices won't be used until this specific context and product. One element which I think has been disappearing, unfortunately, into this latest version is this notion of technical aggregator of these distributed devices, which we think is a very important element to ensure connectivity of devices with a service provider, and also easy switching of a service provider if consumers want to change or and use different service provider offering. I think these are very, very important elements into this data exchange. We hope that this will be in a way considered through the flexibility information system in the associated interaction. We very welcome the what was just said on the point 6 in particular, and the link with the table of equivalence for the standardized product. At least it ensures that if a product is standardized at pan-European, there is a need to consider European standards. But we don't understand why this would not apply also to national products, and we don't understand, in particular in the context of flexible information system offering a single window into national markets, why we don't use the same harmonized standard as defined in the European scale, simply to define this data exchange. Once again, the battery or the charger is going to be exactly the same across these various countries. So as much as possible, harmonizing these local country interface is very crucial. So we hope that through the next phase of implementation, it will come clearer that in the national level, as soon as the standard exists at pan-European level, countries will make use of these standards, and there is no intention of bringing national implementation to create a new barrier to these devices. If we go to the next slides, I think that was already made in my previous slide. The notion of technical aggregator and interface with service provider is kind of not really covered. I think in the discussion it's considered into as more as a retail part. I'm not sure we don't think it's a retail part actually, but it's good to see that on the green arrow, this harmonization of API is today well considered for a standard product. We hope that FCR, as what you said, will be considered as part of the standard product. And we also hope that we can move towards integrating all required signal for operational activation of flexibility service providers. If we go to the next slide, just a few words to say that these Sense and Select set of standards are actually more or less already existing. And as part of this, we wanted to remind that there was a lot of discussion made in the drafting committee around which standards and so on. The decision was to say this code is not for being too technical, and so there is a bit of now uncertainty on where this discussion on standard is going to happen. We insist that we need to reuse what exists and not reinvent the wheel. We need to go fast. This implementation should be made as much as possible within the next 1 to 2 years, I would say, coming. And there is a lot of ongoing efforts organized around the Data for Energy working group. And we hope that it will also be an interesting forum to detail some further technical detail of the use of these standards, on the top, of course, of the joint working group of ENSOE and the DSO entity, who are also working on to some element of this data exchange. And we remind that we really want on overall product to cover all processes of registration, baselining, bidding, activation, and settlements. So not only the flexible information system interface as what is currently being considered in the joint working group, but all this crucial process to be able to enable these flexibility markets in the future. But again, great to see these steps made, and we hope the same constructive thinking can be made so that we avoid any unnecessary national market fragmentation from that point of view. A side remark to say that this would have been easier for us to read if we would have put all data harmonization in a single part of a text, and now it's kind of diffused between EBGL, SOGL, and network codes, which for newcomers into this space makes it extremely hard to read and understand the sophistication of all these data exchange. I hope we can produce guidelines in a way so that we simplify some of these aspects for newcomers. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. So maybe we can move on now to markets interaction. I will present the main elements as included in the network code, and then we'll give the floor to Guru from Smarten for their views. In the network code, we cover the market-based procurement of local services in Title 4. The structure of the rules related to that are under the national terms and conditions for service providers for local services. We have the specific rules for market-based procurement, and then they include three main parts: the requirements for procuring system operators, the coordination and interoperability with other markets, and finally the procurement, pricing, and settlement. There are three main elements that I would like to highlight also today, because it was a part, there have been a lot of discussions around them. So the first one is related to the role of the local market operator. We don't have a separate appointment or designation. We cover that through the delegation and assignment provisions in Article 8. The second element, which is changed compared to the public consultation draft, is that now the procuring system operator may forward bids to other markets. So the point has always been on our side that we consider important not to fragment markets, as we may risk losing liquidity. So in the public consultation, we had that as a shall statement, that following the discussions, also the consultation with the stakeholders, we understand that this cannot be the case for all forward bids. So we need to make sure that this is checked on a case-by-case basis, and once we have clear rules defined for such forwarding. And the third aspect is that in case we have third parties assuming the role of the local market operator, then we have additional provisions on neutrality and business separation. So just to start by saying that in the network code, we don't have a single or target design for the market-based procurement of local services, as we understand that there are different conditions and maturity levels across member states. So we have that left open for decision at national level. And that means that different designs, from completely centralizing it, so having like a single local market operator at national level for the market-based procurement of all local services, is possible. But also, on the other hand, we can also have the case where different market-based procurement processes are linked also together with other markets. So what we have in the network code is that as a starting point, the design is open. We have these may forward bids in order to ensure that the linking is facilitated through this requirement. And then what we have opted for was stricter requirements on interoperability and data exchange, in order to make sure that at least even if we have multiple procurement processes, they are at least well connected, and there is a possibility of exchanging data between them. Regarding the design, as I mentioned, we don't have the local market operator role. We have the concepts of delegation and assignment. Delegation is when a system operator delegates a task either to another system operator or to a third party. And in this case, you can have the whole market-based procurement process as a task to be delegated to another party, or it could be only aspects of this process either to another system operator or to a third entity. But we also have the option at member state level to have this assignment, which is when either the member state or the NRA assign specific tasks or obligations to other parties or system operators. And in this case, we can come up with all different possible options, meaning that at the member state level, the assignment of all the procurement processes could be put on a third party, so completely not system operator, but it could also be that there is one system operator with the market-based procurement of all services at national level, or any combination of the two. So it is very open, and we consider that we facilitate also all the different needs at national level, depending on the maturity levels of the procurement processes by different system operators. And I will stop here and give the floor to Guru.
Thank you, Athena, for introduction, and thank you also very much for this invitation to comment. Before I start, I'd like to congratulate you on finalizing this step of the network code. I do absolutely appreciate the amount of work behind this draft. I think the process also before with the system operators and drafting committee was ended up with being a very good one. So that was a pleasure to participate.
You're muted, Guru.
Sorry, I'll start again then. Thank you. So, thank you, Athena, for your introduction and for the invitation to comment.
That part we had.
Part you got. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So, it was just the very last. So start with the presentation.
Okay.
And thanks a lot.
So, it's a pleasure to see in your slides that ACER is concerned with market fragmentation. Indeed, if you enable flexibility service providers to stack value across markets, then you simultaneously enable the buyers, in particular system operators, TSOs and DSOs, to maximize the available volumes. And facilitating a smooth access to value stacking is particularly important for smaller FSPs, which are very present, especially in local flexibility markets on lower voltage level. And it's important to ensure that liquidity is not drained from local flexibility markets, especially low voltage, until onto other markets, such as, for instance, balancing markets, for those flexibility service providers that are eligible for participating there. So we need to keep flexibility in all markets at the same time, and that is the aim of market coordination. When you don't have that, for instance, if a flexibility service provider can't simultaneously be active in local markets on low voltage level and the balancing market, then the balancing market drains liquidity out of the local market, and there's not much left for the DSO to use. And this is what we want to avoid. If we click. So we therefore consider that the network code should be more ambitious than it is in its current draft, and set market coordination as a target in all member states. I think you said previously, Athena, that the network code should be more or less the same for 10 years. So we have to look ahead and establish targets, even if all member states are not yet mature enough to establish market coordination today. Also, we should not limit this coordination only to local markets on different voltage levels, which was a model that you referred to on the left side on your slide with a nationally assigned operator of local markets. We need also to include other markets where the products are compatible with the local flexibility markets or local markets, such as, for instance, MFRR market. If you click. So the coordination will depend on the particular characteristics, but generally speaking, it can be sequential, where bids from local markets are forwarded to the MFRR at gate closure, or simultaneous, where the same bid is available in several markets at the same time, of course, provided that this particular bid, this particular FSP is qualified for all this market and wants this coordination to happen. Click, please. And this requires the cooperation of all relevant market operators, in particular the TSO for the MFRR market. And therefore, it's not enough, as we see it, as it's stated in the draft network code, that market coordination is a possibility expressed in the way that the procuring ESO may forward bids. The operator of the receiving market, so the TSO for MFRR, needs to cooperate, and thus this cooperation should be made mandatory through the network code. If you go to the next slide. So now the network code establishes, just like the Clean Energy Package already established in 2019, that system operators are to procure flexibility or congestion management products in a market-based way. That's very well. ACER's own market monitoring report on barriers that was mentioned by Matthew at the start of this webinar from 2023 shows that a very common reason for system operators not to procure market-based flexibility is that there is no market. So it's very important to establish who is in charge with actually having this market when there is none. We're happy to read in the network code that the responsibility of setting up a market is now generally given to the procuring system operator. However, we also read that the member state may assign this responsibility nationally to one system operator or to a third party. And this introduces an uncertainty on who is actually in charge for setting up markets. And we fear that many system operators will continue the waiting the game that they have been playing over the last 6 years. And now, through the network code, they actually have received a good argument for this as the possibility that the member state assigns responsibilities to a centralized part creates a risk of sunk costs for first mover SOs. Their efforts to set up a market risk to be cancelled by a late national decision for a centralized arrangement. And therefore, we consider that the assignment of a local market operator should only be used as a last resort in the case where a system operator has failed in setting up a well-functioning market. So we are in favour of leaving the system operator with the responsibility of having a market, but that does not mean that we want all system operators to invent their own market platform. On the contrary, system operators should delegate the operation of their local markets to third-party market operators, of course, with neutrality requirements. Indeed, this would guarantee neutrality, as third-party market operators would not be able to act as buyers, like the system operators, or as sellers in the market. We would only organize the market. And as the number of candidates here is far lower than the number of system operators in Europe, I think we count around 10 commercial platform providers today compared to thousands of DSOs in Europe. This would naturally lead to harmonization, sharing of experience, and sharing of costs, actually, between system operators. Moreover, the competition between platforms would enable innovation through competition between these platforms. And in the case, and only in the case where no appropriate third-party provider can be found, for some reason, then of course the system operator should be allowed to develop its own platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Guro. I think, sorry, I was not seeing. So thank you. We're a bit behind schedule, but I think we're okay in terms of time. So I would now go to the second Q&A session. And indeed, first focusing on the data exchange, and then focusing on the question on the market interaction. Maybe to start with, need some high-scoring questions on the data exchange part. I don't know if Laurent is online, because I think there's maybe some questions also for him. So if you're there. So the first question is, will there be a certification requirements for electric vehicles resulting from the demand response regulation? And will there be data sharing requirements for electric vehicles? Will certification data sharing already be covered by fulfilling the DCC-RG certification requirements? I don't know if I need to put it on Athina first or on Laurent, but maybe Athina, you can give it a go.
Yeah, just to clarify that there are no specific certification requirements coming out of the network code for electric vehicles, so that's clear. What there is on the data sharing requirements is more what will come later on with data exchange requirements, but it's nothing specific to electric vehicles. But yeah, Laurent.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I understand well the question on whether this is related to the connection code part of the requirement, or whether it's related to the data exchange. What we are as Solar Power Europe really recommending is to harmonize as much as possible these data exchanges, what I mentioned, and also to facilitate, I would say, these technical aggregator to service provider environments in order to bring freedom to consumers to opt for a different option of service provider while keeping the same type of data exchange. In the case of electrical vehicle, what is very interesting is, of course, these products are going to circulate across borders. And so the need for pan-European standard is even more. So one could wonder whether an electrical vehicle into a national product, into a national market in, say, France or Germany, would be able to participate into another national product in Holland, let's say, and how would that work if we would have completely different standards here? So that really raised again the question on why do we keep these standards at national level, which is a way of protecting market, the way we can understand it. And behind this data exchange, I want also to highlight the topics of DMDs and how do we access to these crucial data of DMDs. And again, the same question, how are we going to certify this data exchange from DMDs and others? So I hope that we can find all these responses in the next phase of the discussions.
Thanks, Laurent. Athina, I noticed the number of questions were indeed about the data standard and its application. I think there's the top one now, and I think the third one as well. But maybe you can take them together.
Yep. So on the move to a new single recommended standard.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's a fair point, and we have clarified the new will be on top of what is already implemented. So it wouldn't mean that they would have to change the ones already there now would have to change necessarily the standards. It's more about going into one for the future. But I think it is clearly mentioned in the balancing regulation that existing can be kept additional. And the other one,
I think it was about the mandatory and whether they keep existing. So I think it was the same.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think then there's one on requirements impacting vehicle design following the demand response, and whether they will be harmonized across the EU. And requirements outside of WVTA are unusual, and therefore it would need specific attention that these requirements are as well harmonized in the EU. I'm not sure if that last part concerns us, but I don't know if you can say something, or maybe it's more for Laurent to answer.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I will only say that it is not. We don't have provision specific to vehicles, but of course, whatever is related. So, if there is a provision of a service for a standardized product with standardized data exchange, then it needs to comply with that. So, I think it's more about following this reasoning rather than having something specific or a requirement on the electric vehicles.
Yeah, maybe just my comment on that is I hope the D4E group will be able to set up and clarify some of these questions. I think these are very valid questions. And again, a mass-produced product, and this is not only for electrical vehicles, this is also for EV charging equipment, solar inverter, behind the meter batteries, heat pump. All these are actually mass-produced and are European products. So I think this is very, very important to move one step further onto these aspects.
Maybe Laurent, there was although low-storing question, but maybe also for you, because it was a question you need how to define a mass-produced device. Basically, it's a bit self-explanatory, but you probably have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I would say we define it as our industry define it in the solar power industry. So these are devices which stands behind a meter, particularly into home environments. Why did we focus onto this one? Is because we think these assets are actually unfairly treated into current balancing markets. So that's why we put specific focus onto these ones. And these assets have the particularity that they are installed in consumer environment and they are not designed for the purpose of flex. They are designed for the purpose of putting vehicle on roads or heating homes. And so that's where basically when you design such product, the harmonization of the interface is not the primary design requirement. And if you make this national, you're most likely going to get these devices not interacting with this future flexibility market, which is today what we see in most of, for instance, solar and storage behind the meter. So that's why we put this specific requirement on these specific cases, which are low-hanging fruit for this code.
Thanks. So next question, Athena, for you. Let's see, I think it's the last one on this topic. So for ACER, in the case of DSO flexibility, all service provision must be accounted at the accounting point. Otherwise, there's no provision of service. Can member states define that the settlement must be done at the accounting point and not at the controllable unit or DMD level? It is important to do such simple without barriers. I think it's a bit more aggregation model, but yeah, a bit in between. But
Yeah, so I mean, what we have now, it is, of course, the use of DMDs to be used also for settlement of the provision of the service, but we always have also this notion that it should also be reflected at the connection point, because, I mean, we had a lot of such discussions, so we also understand that there could be a case when we only have it at the CU or the DMD level. But we consider that this should be the principle unless the connection point says that the service was not provided. But we take into consideration this element. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. So I propose to go to the market interaction because we also had a lot of questions there and also very high scoring ones. So maybe first, I think on the forwarding of bits on slide 40, the question whether it's a may or a shall in the network code. That's it.
Yeah, so it is a may now. It used to be mandatory. That was the public consultation version, but now it is a may because we consider that it cannot be implemented in all cases, so we cannot have shall forward bits. We consider that to be more possibility when it can be implemented on the basis of the markets and following the specification of exact rules for having that. So it is a May now.
Thanks. The next question is a bit from the beginning of the presentation on where balancing services were placed next to grid support services, congestion management, and voltage control. And the question is, are market participants allowed to offer their flex only as grid support services and not on the market, possible as balancing services, or indeed could offering it one constitute capacity withholding in the other?
I think that the principle is the same as with balancing, in the sense that there could be, so if there is already a capacity, let's say, tender for these grid services, and the participants or the service providers have already offered their capacity, then this is indeed reserved for activation for grid services, as it's mentioned here. But I would see it then interchangeable also with what happens with balancing. So it's a matter of the timeline, let's say, in the different time frames. So it's not that you don't bid in day ahead in order to offer it later, but it could be the case where 2 days before you could have a capacity auction, and in this case you have reserved pure capacity for offering grid services later on. So in this sense, I would say it the same as balancing.
Okay, thank you, Athena. So the next one is in the network of demand response, it's not clear that DSO member states are free to establish their own market design for DSO services. DSO services are very different comparing with TSO services and wholesale markets. Can a member state design a DSO flexibility market not integrated with any of the other established markets?
Okay, so what is now in the network code is that the responsibility for the procurement of market-based procurement of services is with each procuring system operator. So that's the obligation. What we presented is that at national level, this obligation may be assigned to a third party, and in this sense, it could be a different market design, bringing together, for example, a platform for both DSOs and DSOs, or for multiple DSOs. So it is not clearly stated as such, but this is the outcome of the provisions included in the network code. Now, if a member state can design a DSO flexibility market not integrated with any of the other established markets, I mean, by other flexibility market, based on the network code, they could do that. So they could have separate markets. What we have in the network code is that products should be standardized, data exchange should be standardized. So it's mainly about linking those different markets if they are established differently and not following like a more common approach. I hope it answers.
Thank you, Athena. Suppose we go to the next. This is the interaction with Article 13 of the regulation. So is non-market-based redispatching considered as a local services, especially according to need to obtain a derogation of Article 30? If yes, why? Since Article 13 of the regulation does not provide a legal basis for such regulation.
Yeah, so the Article 32 of the Electricity Directive requires that there is this market-based procurement of services unless the NRA suggests that it is not efficient. So on this basis, we have the process of included in Article 30 for requesting a derogation. Also, Article 13 does not specify a process for that. So with this regulation, where we further implement and specify the requirements of higher regulations that such the electricity regulation, the electricity directive, we actually clarify this whole process.
Thank you, Athena. I think we'll take two more, and then I think we need to close looking at time. So first, market-based procurement of local services is likely to be problematic because of the limited number of possible candidates non-market-based procurement could work well. Does market-based procurement remain, non-market-based, sorry, procurement remain an option for member states? And I think that there's an addition that there's a lot of DSOs with less than 100,000 connections.
Yes, so this market-based, non-market-based, it is like an open debate on the specifics of each case, and this is why the market-based is set as a general rule. But of course, there is the possibility for deviating from this rule as long as there is an assessment that setting up a market-based process is not efficient. And there are different conditions that should be fulfilled. In this case, there should be a clear justification. So the possibility still exists for the for specific cases. And indeed, agreeing also with the comment mentioned there is already the possibility of not general exemption, but it can be easier and address it at the member state level in this sense, instead of having each DSO assessing and justifying why they request non-market-based procurement.
Yeah, maybe the last question, because I also see some other questions, although still pending, on the forwarding of bids. So indeed, this question is forwarding bids from different markets is questionable as the products are different, and so the bid prices could be or should be different. Is it better to allow for simultaneous bidding on different markets with automatic removing of bids if one is activated versus the other, or do we foresee something else? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would agree. I mean, the same approach is followed now for the different balancing platforms, for example. So you just link the bids, and indeed, if it is elected in one process, then you just remove it from the other. The problem is that now we have the balancing platforms. They are all operated by all TSOs, so it's easy also to implement. It's more feasible to implement this link. It would be more difficult in markets that do not directly communicate. But I agree with the concerns regarding the different products and the fact that there should be very clear rules on how this forwarding is done. And also, I mean, if the markets were integrated, that would be even better. In this case, indeed, it would be allowed to do this linking directly on bid level.
Good, thank you, Athena. I think we have to stop. I know we have, and maybe for those that have submitted their question, I know we have a number of additional questions. We'll try to answer them in the Slido and reply to them in writing there. I would then go indeed to the next steps. Maybe Thomas, I know. Let me check if Thomas is here. Is your camera working, Thomas?
It should be. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I hear you, but I don't see you currently. But yeah, please check with the camera, and otherwise we do it without, which is. So thanks, Thomas, for joining us today. Indeed, to give a bit of an insight into what are the next steps. I can tell you, maybe I already have some questions labeled as next steps questions. So maybe we can also take them after your presentation, and you give a bit of heads up on questions. But please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Mathieu, and thank you everyone for the organization of this workshop. Thank you for the to the presenters, to the participants, to make this workshop very collaborative. So my name is Thomas Kawam. I work in DG Energy of the European Commission in the unit C3 for the internal energy market. And today's presentation will be very short. It's just about providing the next steps following the reception of the demand response network code proposal from ACER. So I started by thanking you for the workshop, but I would also like to thank ACER and all the stakeholders involved for the proposal of the network code that was submitted. As shown by Mathieu in his first slide, this is a result of a very long process starting in 2021. it led to framework guidelines, our first proposal from the system operators, and then the proposal from the regulator, leading us to today. So now that we have received this draft proposal, we will look into it and identify the areas for review. And this exercise will include a consultation. This consultation is likely to focus on targeted topics with specific questions. And in terms of indicative timing, we plan on organizing this consultation around the summer. Throughout these periods, as you can see on the slide, Q2, Q3, we aim at working on the draft, and then we will finalize it and submit it for discussion and adoption by the member states, following a comitology process. So this is the usual process that we're following for the network codes, and the discussions and the decisions will be taken in the European Cross-Border Committee with the member states. So what is the target date for the adoption? The recently published affordable action plan for affordable energy mentions the initiative as an important action, and the targeted timing for the adoption is Q1 2026, so Q1 next year. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the contact details of the team that will be working on this network code. So you have my name and address, the name and address of my colleague, Teresa. We will be the two policy officers working on this network code. And then you have the contact details of Anne, which is our team lead for the electricity network code. And that was it from my end. And I will just finish by thanking you again for the proposal and the workshop, and then back the floor to Mathieu.
Thank you, Thomas. And thanks for indeed this follow-up. Maybe Thomas, I can briefly come back to you with two questions that were on the next steps list I had in the Slido. Because they both relate a bit to the interaction with other network codes currently under consideration in the Commission. So I hope I can get can get you to answer those. They're a bit interrelated, because one is indeed the question on how Commission intends to take the draft proposals on the network codes, the demand connection network code, always not to confuse them with the demand response, and indeed how the connection code 2.0 process would be affected by it. And indeed, maybe the other question related, indeed how, and it's a question to ACER, but I think it's more a question to the Commission, how you intend to prioritize the implementation of the topics and all the other ongoing market and operational developments.
So I cannot provide a fully and extensive and firm answer to those points. What I can say is that we have this deadline, or at least this indicative target for the network code on demand response. As indicated earlier, this network code leads to changes in other network codes, namely EBGL and the demand connection codes. But we see those changes as independent of overall review of the demand connection codes. And I know that the work is ongoing in parallel, but the exact sequence of the entry into force of those network code is not yet clear, and will clarify over the next month.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Maybe then one final question to Athena, because we also talked about indeed subsequent monitoring and our work in DRESC. And the question was whether we have a deadline on our first monitoring report on the implementation. I think it's the next steps reports we referred to before.
Yeah, so I mean, it's for this first extensive implementation monitoring exercise, we don't have yet a clear timeline. I mean, it will be communicated also to the stakeholders, but the aim is to have a lot of discussions before, also with stakeholders, in order to identify best practices and to check which aspects would make sense to monitor. So it will be a lot of discussions before also on the setup of the report. But thanks.
Good, thank you very much. I think it's now time to go to closure of the webinar today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. As said, we'll try to answer the questions that remained unanswered during the webinar. Apologies for that. It's not always possible to answer every individual question, but I hope we found a balance between answering them. I would like to point you to the satisfaction survey about the webinar. It is open now. It's the last poll in the Slido. So I would really appreciate if you can give us your feedback on the webinar. I see we still have a lot of people here, so that would be really helpful also for us to improve in the future. Maybe then one slide. So as said before, and also in the questions, we had a few years ago a study on barriers to demand response. We now have an update of that, which is indeed intends to list the no regret measures, or the things that member states can already do to get demand response going in different aspects of the work. There's of course a lot of relation also with the demand response network code and the direction we indicate in that, while at the same time indeed also pointing back to the electricity directive implementation requirements that are already there. Indeed, you see here a nice analogy with the revised regulations opening the door to market access, so to say. But indeed, we do hope that before that, work can already start, and we can already get moving, because I think we all see that we need to get going, and we need to get implementing these rules, as we've indeed spent already a lot of time of getting this framework in place. So that is something that will come early April. So please keep an eye on our website, and when it will be published, you will be able to find it there. I think that is it. I would thank you for your participation and attention. I thank the speakers for their contribution today, and have a nice day, and hope to see you soon.